Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. Alright, so for this video, I will be starting off my brand new series of videos where I will be ranking everything that Stephen King has ever written. This will be the very first video in my Ranking Stephen King's video series. And for anyone who doesn't know, or for anyone who's new to my channel, Stephen King is my second favorite author of all time, just behind George R.R. Martin. And I've already made quite a few Stephen King related videos, and they're all in a playlist on my channel. So if you're interested in checking out any Stephen King related content, you can check that out. I've watched so many people rank their favorite Stephen King books on YouTube over the past probably decade or so, and I'm very excited to now start my own. And the reason why I want to make these series of videos, and the reason why I watched so many people's ranking videos in the past, is because Stephen King has written so many books, and the King fandom is so diverse in what they love and what they hate that when you watch people's lists, you get radically different picks every time. And I feel like mine is unique enough to where I feel it warrants a series of videos, and I'm very interested to see what people think of my list. Pretty much my only criteria for making this list is I'm basing it off of enjoyment, how much I either really enjoyed it or how much I did not enjoy it. And the other one is readability. How often will I go back and read these books? Will I ever read some of these bottom books again? Those are the only two things I'm basing it off of. Enjoyment and readability. And since this is the first video and I counted it up and there's 75 books I'm going to include on here, I'm going to go ahead and do the first 15, so 75 through 61. And because of that, I'm not going to go super into detail about these books, especially because, they're at the bottom of the list. They're clearly not my favorites. I will talk about why I don't like them, but I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible so that this video isn't super duper long. All right, anyway, let's jump right into it. So, full disclosure, I usually tell people that I've read everything that Stephen King has written. This is a little bit misleading because the very first book on this list, number 75, my least favorite King book, I have never been able to finish, and that would be Black House. I've started this book, I think, probably 3 or 4 times, and every time I can barely get, 50, 60 pages into it, and there's a reason for that, and that is because Black House is the sequel to my number 74 pick, which is The Talisman, which is by far my least favorite King book I have managed to finish. Honestly, there's not too much that I can say fondly about this book. Not only is this book super long and tedious, which is a very big pet peeve of mine, which you'll see as we go on in the list. Not only that, there's no good characters for me in this book, and that's one of the main reasons why I read King in the first place, is because he has terrific characters. And even if you read a bad King book, you can at least expect 1 or 2 characters to latch onto. In this book, I didn't give a crap about any of the characters. Any characters. So yeah, Black House and The Talisman are definitely at the bottom for me, for sure. And for number 73, I'm going to have to go with Danse Macabre. This is actually King writing nonfiction, pretty much his thoughts on the horror genre, and it's very dry and very scholarly and very clinical. It's not a very fun read at all, and a lot of the stuff in here I just wasn't, it was just very boring. I guess if you're really into the horror genre and you want to go a little more in depth, you know, maybe you can try it out. But for me, I just wasn't into it. And it's number 73. And number 72, which was a huge waste of money for me, Elevation. Not only did I pay a good amount of money for such a short little novella, it wasn't even good. So, complete waste of money. Again, none of the characters were very interesting, but the main issue with the book is that there's no real conflict in the book. There's not a lot of stakes, and for that reason, it's just a very boring read. So, yeah, that's why this is really low on the list at 72. And for anyone who's watched some of my videos, this will come as no surprise. Number 71 is Nightmares and Dreamscapes. By far my least favorite of his collections. This is supposed to be a short story collection. Short story collection. And the reason why it's not at the very bottom of the list is that there is one good short story in here that's actually pretty good. It's called Suffer the Little Children. It's pretty good. But everything else is either just okay at best or just mediocre. And all the stories are just very tedious, boring, and or forgettable. So that's why it's so low on the list for me at number 71. And number 70 on the list is Rage, one of his Richard Bachman books. I don't have a copy of that because it's very rare, but I will hold up the Bachman books, which it is in this collection. See, it's right there. Rage. Rage is about a kid who basically goes to school one day, shoots his math teacher, and holds the class hostage. And this was written well before school shootings started happening a lot in the States, like Columbine and all of that mess. So I could see when King was writing this in the 70s that the premise could be intriguing, right? But when you read it today, the things that go on in this book and like the ending of the book, it's very hard to suspend my disbelief for. And normally King is excellent at getting me to believe in the moment crazy stuff. But for this book, I just couldn't do it, and it just wasn't that great. And number 69 on the list is End of Watch, which is the third book in the Bill Hodges trilogy. So like I said, it's the third book in the trilogy, and I actually liked the first two books. The first book was pretty good, and then I actually really enjoyed the second book. But for this book, he introduces an element to the story that I just felt didn't fit well with how he wrote the first two books. The first two books were really grounded in reality. And then in this third book, he introduces an element that it just doesn't fit with the rest of the story that we were given. It also just wasn't nearly as compelling as the first two books. And for that reason, it's number 69. And number 68 on the list is The Tommyknockers. For a lot of King fans, I would suspect that this would be at the very bottom of their lists. And I can understand why, but for me, there's a few reasons why it's not his complete worst book. I thought this book actually started out fairly well. Like the first 100, maybe like 150 pages were pretty intriguing. And the two main characters that we follow and kind of the story that they're going through was good enough to get me through that. The bad part of the book is the middle chunk and the ending. It just wasn't good. And this is probably a theme that's going to run through some of these first few videos that I make, where a lot of longer King books are going to be near the bottom. And The Tommyknockers is no exception because, like I said, it starts out well enough, but then you get to the middle chunk of the book and the ending, and you feel like this book should have been heavily edited. Like, it could have been a very good, I don't know, like 300, 400 page book, but what we got was a 700 page, uh, what do you even call it? A hot mess. But again, it's not absolute garbage, which, that's not saying much, but it's not terrible. And I can understand why people do enjoy it, but for me, it's number 68. And number 67 on the list is The Bazaar of Bad Dreams. This book is definitely better than Nightmares and Dreamscapes, but while saying that, it's also a mixed bag, where a lot of the stories are just very lukewarm or very underwhelming, and then the stories that are good, they're good, but they're not, like, terrific. And I also remember reading this when it first came out, and when it came out, I was super hyped for it because I just started reading King, and I had read probably like 20, 25 of his books, and I was super excited for like a new King book. But when I read it, I was super underwhelmed. I will say that this is the first book on the list that I would consider rereading at some point, because I haven't read it in a long time, and maybe I would like it better upon a reread. But for the books that were previous to this book, the books that I've already mentioned, I don't plan on reading those or rereading those anytime soon, or for some cases, ever. And number 66 on the list would be Cell. The premise of this book is it's essentially an apocalypse story set upon by cell phones, which might have been a pretty cool premise when it came out in the early 2000s, but reading it, I think I read this, I don't know, maybe like in 2015 or so, it wasn't that gripping. It had a decent enough start to it, and the characters were fine, but overall the book wasn't that compelling. And the main reason why it's a little bit higher than some of these other books is that it's short and it's easy enough to get through. It doesn't overstay its welcome. So yeah, number 66 is Cell. And number 65 on the list is Bag of Bones. This book I really remember not enjoying a whole lot when I read it. So that's why it's pretty low on the list. But I put it a little higher just because I don't remember a lot about it. And I always see King fans talk about this book with such high regard. A lot of people who have read it, it's a lot of their favorite King books. And it puzzles me because when I've read it, I remember not enjoying it a lot. But it's one of the books that I'm actually more inclined to want to reread just because I see so many people say it's one of their favorites. So that's why it's higher on the list, even though I don't remember liking it very much. So number 65, Bag of Bones. And number 64 on the list is Insomnia. This book isn't necessarily bad, it's decent, and it's got a decent enough main character. And for anyone who's read, like the Dark Tower series, it has some interesting Dark Tower tie-ins. But overall, the plot and all that goes on in this book wasn't that compelling. And a lot of the side characters I wasn't into. So, again, not one of my favorite King books. And I guess it's a little higher just because, it's got a decent enough main character. And again, the Dark Tower stuff was interesting, but again, not higher because the plot itself was a little boring and lackluster. So that was number 64, Insomnia. And number 63 is Liza's Story. I always forget how to pronounce it. Either way, it's number 63. This book is a classic example of when Stephen King takes a good enough story that has a great start with pretty good characters, and through the middle of the book or towards the end of the book, he shoehorns in an unnecessary supernatural element that completely takes me out of the story and basically ruins it for me. It was a decent enough start, like I said. The characters were very compelling, but like I said, he shoehorns in a supernatural element it's just dumb. Like, I was reading it and I was like, I don't like this. Like, you could have just stuck with the two main characters, and it's essentially about a woman who's grieving her dead husband and she's looking back on her life. That was a good enough story. And then a bunch of weird crap happens, and there's some possible Dark Tower related stuff going on, but come on, King. Come on. Anyway, yeah, number 63, Liza's Story. Lisa's Story, either way, it's not great. Oh, and another thing that I don't like about this book is the lovey-dovey language, their own made-up language between the husband and wife. I did not like that at all, and that really took me out of the story, and I'm glad I remembered that because, man, if that wasn't in there, this probably could be higher, which, I don't know. Speaking of books that King wrote that he completely ruined by shoehorning in a unnecessary supernatural element, we have number 62, which is Rose Matter. And this is definitely not an unpopular opinion. When you look at like ranking King lists, this is always near the bottom, and for good reason, because this book starts out relatively great. It starts out with a woman on the run from her abusive cop husband, and she flees to New York, and the guy is trying to find her. It's pretty good, and the main character is very compelling. But the supernatural element he introduces halfway through this book is so stupid. It's so stupid. He could have easily wrote a very gripping tale that was just about a wife running away from her abusive husband, trying to start a new life, and then, the husband eventually, catching up with her, and she has to deal with it. But if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's so dumb. It's so dumb. And that's why it's higher than some of the other books, because it starts out really good, like really good. And then the second half just blows. So again, number 62, Rose Matter. And then number 61 is a book that probably not a lot of people who aren't King fans are going to know about, and that would be Storm of the Century. This is essentially just a screenplay for a miniseries that came on in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And it is a pretty good story for what it is, and it's relatively high on the list. But the only reason that it's not higher is just because, like I said, it's a screenplay for, something that already exists. And if I want to enjoy the story or engross myself in the story, I'll just go back and watch the miniseries. Like, there's no reason to read a screenplay when there's already an adaptation. So that's why it's good, but, I'd rather just watch the miniseries. So to end this video, we got number 61, Storm of the Century. All right, so that's the end of my very first video in this ranking Stephen King books series. And just to recap, this was books 75 through 61, and next Friday we'll be looking at the books 60 through 51. Books that are slightly better than these books, which I mainly don't like very much. Next week's are going to be books that I still don't really love, but they're slightly better. And make sure you stay tuned in, because there's going to be at least 2, maybe even 3 books in that video that are going to surprise some people and make a lot of people mad. But, it's my ranking video, so I can do whatever I want. Wow, I feel like Eric Cartman right now. I do what I want. Anyways, hopefully that video wasn't too long. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought of my ranking thus far. Were there any books on here that you agree with me, that you don't really like them too much, or did I mention any of your favorite King books? Either way, please let me know. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, where I make a lot of King content every week. And like I said, this is going to be a regular series until I get to my top 20. And I think when I get down to my top 20, I'm going to do 20 through 16, 15 through 11, 10 through 6, and then 1 through 5. So it's going to be a long series, and I hope you guys tag along because I'm so far having a lot of fun making this. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.